This meeting is being recorded.
We'll first start with the structure of heart. Heart is mesodermally derived organ. What is the meaning of this word mesodermal? Mesodermal means it is derived from the mesoderm of the trilayer and it is located in the mediastinum. Mediastinum means the central portion which is guarded by the sternum at the center and the space that is enclosed, that is called as the mediastinum. It is protected by a double layered membrane which is called as the pericardium and the space between the two membrane is called as the pericardial space, which is filled with the pericardial fluid, and this reduces the friction between the heart walls and the surrounding tissues of the heart. The heart has four chambers, two upper atria or the auricles and the two lower ventricles. The walls, which are called as the cardiac muscles of the ventricles, are much thicker than the atria, which means the walls which are made up of cardiac muscles are thicker in ventricle than in the atrium. And why is this? We'll see later. The atria is separated by interatrial septum, which you can see in the diagram. And in the same way, the ventricles are separated by the interventricular septum, as you see in the diagram. In between the atrium and the ventricle, there is a thick fibrous atrioventricular septum with the opening. So you can find that both the atrium and the ventricle are being connected to each other, and there is a possibility of open exchange of material between the two. Hence, there is a atrioventricular septum, and this consists of a tricuspid wall which has three muscular flaps or cusps, which does the job of opening and closing flexibly, guards the opening between the right atrium and the right ventricle. Bicuspid wall guards the opening between left atrium and the left ventricle. And to note here, the bicuspid valve is also known as the mitral valve or the mitral valve. Both the tricuspid and the bicuspid valve will allow the flow of blood only in one direction, that is from atria to the ventricles. The right ventricle has an opening to the pulmonary artery and the left ventricle has an opening to the aorta, which you can find in the diagram. And these openings have semilunar walls. So whenever I tell the word wall, it means they prevent the backflow of blood. The flow of blood backside should be completely prevented. This diagram completely gives a comparative approach between the dorsal and the ventral side of the human heart. I'll give you 10 to 15 seconds to observe this diagram and then move on to the next slide. Conducting system of heart. The conducting system of heart includes the nodal tissues, the bundles, and the fibers. So it consists of three main components. The nodal tissues are specialized cardiac musculatures that are present in the heart wall. That means they are made up of cardiac muscles, but still they are made up of some special kind of muscles. They are of two types: sinoatrial node (SAN) and atrioventricular node (AVN). The SAN is present in the right upper corner of right atrium, as you can find, and the AVN is present in the left corner of the right atrium, close to the atrioventricular septum. From the AVN, a bundle of fibrous atrioventricular bundle passes through the atrioventricular septa. So what happens here is you can find the atrioventricular bundle passes through the septa and divides into the right and left branches, which you can find. Each of these branch pass through the ventricular walls of its side, so which you can find. And in the ventricular wall, these breaks up into many small fibers, which is called as the Purkinje fibers. And these fibers, along with the bundles together, they are called as the bundle of His. These nodal tissues generate something called as action potential, and this comes without any external stimuli. That is, it is auto-excitable. It is capable of generating an electric impulse, an action potential by them itself without any stimulus. And this SAN initiates and maintains the contraction of heart by generating action potentials of up to 70 to 75 per minute. It's because of this reason that it is called as a pacemaker. Now we'll get into the concept of cardiac cycle. The cardiac cycle is cyclic contraction and relaxation of heart for pumping of blood. Blood has to be pumped from the heart, and that blood has to reach all the organs inside the human body. And if that has to be done, the heart has to contract and relax. So the cyclic contraction and relaxation of the heart for pumping of blood is called as cardiac cycle. There are three phases of cardiac cycle. The first one is the joint diastole, atrial systole, and the ventricular systole. We'll see one by one. The first one, the joint diastole. Joint diastole is a phase where all the heart chambers are in the relaxed state. When the tricuspid and the bicuspid valves open, the blood from the pulmonary vein and vena cava starts to flow inside the left and right ventricles. So you can follow the diagram through the left and right atria. And the semilunar valves are closed at this stage. Then the blood is rushing in into left and right ventricles. When these blood start slowly flowing, as you can see in the diagram, the SAN generates an action potential. As a result, the atria completely begins to contract, and this process is called as the atrial systole. So this will increase the flow of blood into the ventricles by around 30%. The action potential is conducted to the ventricular side, which has been generated by the AVN and the AV bundle, where the bundle of His is already present, and they transmit it through the ventricular musculature. Because of this kind of message transmission, the ventricles contract, and this is called as ventricular systole. And when the process of ventricular systole is happening, the atria undergoes a diastole. So the ventricular systole increases the ventricular pressure, and this causes the closure of both the valves, the bicuspid and the tricuspid, so that there is no backflow of blood. And this backflow should never go to the atria. Now the semilunar valves also open, so the deoxygenated blood enters the pulmonary artery from the right ventricle, and the oxygenated blood enters the aorta from the left ventricle. So we can find from the picture that just pulmonary artery and aorta are the two which are completely devoid of their conventional functions. Usually the arteries carry the oxygenated blood and the veins carry the deoxygenated blood, but the pulmonary and the aorta will do the functions opposite to each other. This is exclusively due to the opening of the semilunar valves. Finally, the ventricles relax, and this is called as the ventricular diastole, and the ventricular pressure falls, and this causes the closure of the semilunar valves, and this will also prevent the backflow of blood into the ventricles, and then the tricuspid and the bicuspid valves are open because of the pressure that is built up in atria. So at this point we can tell one side of the heart completely gives the blood for transportation, oxygenated blood to transportation to all organs of the body, and the other side completely cycles with the deoxygenated blood. So the ventricles and the atria again undergo a joint diastole, and the whole cardiac cycle is even then repeated again. So I'll stop here for 10 seconds so that you will have an idea on seeing the picture what exactly is cardiac cycle. We'll get into the concepts of stroke volume and cardiac output in the next video.
This meeting is being recorded.
Stroke volume and cardiac output. A cardiac cycle which we saw earlier gets completed in less than 1 second. So in 0.8 seconds, the whole of the cardiac cycle is completed. And when I tell one cardiac cycle is completed, it means there is a generation impulse of one heartbeat that takes place. So a normal heartbeat has a period of range between 70 to 75 times per minute. So in a healthy human being, there is supposed to be 72 number of heartbeats in 1 minute. Now we'll get into this concepts of stroke volume and cardiac output. If you take stroke volume, it is the volume of blood that is pumped out by each ventricle during a cardiac cycle. It is about 70 ml. Cardiac output is the volume of blood pumped out by each ventricle per minute. That is the stroke volume into the heart rate. So if the stroke volume is supposed to be 70 ml into the number of beatings of the heart, that is 72, and it will come to 5000 ml or 5 liters. So the cardiac output of an athlete is very, very high because the amount of energy that he requires for oxygenation is even more higher. During each cardiac cycle, there are two different sounds that are produced. The first sound is lub, L-U-B. This is due to the closure of tricuspid and the bicuspid valve. The second sound, dub, is due to the closure of semilunar valves. And why these open and close, we already saw in the previous segments. So one heartbeat, if I tell, that is equal to one lub plus one dub. Electrocardiograph. Electrocardiograph is an instrument that is used to obtain a reading called as electrocardiogram. This electrocardiogram is a graphical representation of the electrical activity of the heart during the cardiac cycle. So where does the action potential come? How does this energy get transmitted? Whether there is active functionability, All these things are called as the cardiac cycle. So the graphical representation of the electrical activity of heart during the cardiac cycle. To get an ECG, the patient is first connected with the machine with 3 electrical leads, one to its wrist, other one also to his wrist, and finally one to the monitor to see the heart activity. For detailed evaluation of heart's function, multiple leads are attached to a chest region. So depending upon what is the heart's function with respect to different chambers, different valves, to check all these things in detail, there'll be different kinds of leads that will be attached to the chest region for detailed analysis. An ECG will consist of the following indicators, which are called as the waves. The first one is called as the P wave. The P wave represents the excitation or the depolarization of atria, and this causes the atrial systole. There is the QRS complex, which represents the depolarization of ventricles or the ventricular systole. The T wave represents the repolarization of the ventricles. So P is depolarization, QRS complex is also depolarization, and T wave alone is repolarization. The deviation in the ECG indicates that there is some abnormality or a disease that is concerned with the heart functioning. So to put it in simple words, the ECG has got a great clinical significance when it comes to heart diseases. Double circulation. Double circulation is the process of circulation by which the blood flows through the heart twice for completing its circuit. And this includes the pulmonary circulation and systemic circulation. Pulmonary circulation is the circulation between heart and lungs. So the deoxygenated blood from the right ventricle will move through the pulmonary artery to the lungs and then get oxygenated and then go back to the pulmonary veins to the left atrium. Systemic circulation is the circulation of blood between heart and various body parts. So the oxygenated blood from the left ventricle goes through the aorta, through the arteries, and then the arterioles, the capillaries, the tissues, and from the tissues the deoxygenated blood is collected and goes to the venulus, that is the veins, and vena cava, and finally to the right atrium for oxygenation. This systemic circulation provides nutrients, oxygen, other substances to all the tissues, and it gets back the CO2 and the harmful substances from it in exchange for elimination. So this is pulmonary and systemic circulations. Now when you take a cardiac cycle, there are two different systems which are associated to it. The one is the hepatic portal system and the coronary circulatory system. Hepatic portal system consists of the hepatic portal vein that will carry the blood from intestine to liver before it is delivered to systemic circulation. So when I say cardiac cycle and relate these two do not directly take part in the cardiac cycle, but still they have a significance. So the hepatic portal vein carries the blood from intestine to liver before it is delivered to the systemic circulation. Coronary circulatory system consists of coronary vessels that will circulate blood and form a cardiac musculature, which means they are circulating blood to all the places where the cardiac muscles are there, and they are the ones which give the special kind of terrainic surface to the cardiac muscles, and are hence called as the cardiac musculature. Regulation of cardiac activity. Normal activities of heart are auto-regulated by nodal tissues. So we can find that the SAN and the PVN takes care of all the normal activities of heart. So in that case, it is called as a myogenic heart. The medulla oblongata regulates the cardiac activity through the ANS, autonomous nervous system. The sympathetic nerves of the ANS increase the rate of heartbeat, the strength of ventricular contraction and cardiac output. And the parasympathetic nerves of the autonomic nervous system decrease the heartbeat, conduction of action potential and the cardiac output. And finally, the adrenal medullary hormones increase the cardiac output. So we can find brain plays a very crucial role in managing the heartbeat and the regulation of such. The next one is the lymphatic system. The lymphatic system consists of the lymph nodes, lymph vessels. So what is this about? Basically, when the blood passes through the capillaries in the tissues, some water and soluble substances are filtered out from the plasma to the intracellular spaces. So you can find that when the blood capillaries are coming from the artery to the vein, there is some diffusion that is taking place in the middle, and they all together form a tissue or an interstitial fluid. It will be having the same mineral distribution as it is found in the plasma. So when some tissue fluid enters this lymphatic system, and the tissue fluid in them is known as the lymph. So this will drain back to the veins, but still it has some potent capacities which can make the transportation much more easier and concentrated. The functions of the lymph. Lymph is considered to be the middleman between the blood and tissues. The tissue fluid will help to exchange nutrients, gases, all between the blood and cells. It will carry plasma proteins that are synthesized in liver to the blood. It will transport digested fat through the lacteals in the intestinal villi, fat soluble vitamins and hormones, etc. The filtration of bacteria and foreign particles is exclusively done only by the lymphatic system. The lymph nodes produce mass lymphocytes and antibodies, and each one of the lymphocyte is capable of completely surviving in a group of lymphocytic organelles. That is, wherever there is acquainted organelle inside the cell, inside an organ, sorry. And they also have the ability to produce very strong antibodies. Disorders of the circulatory system. The first disorder that is concerned with the circulatory system is hypertension, which is also called as the high blood pressure. So the pressure of a circulating blood on the walls of the blood vessels that carry it is called as blood pressure. The normal blood pressure is 120 by 80, but now there is a lot of the individual uh, shows that it's an average is 140 by 90. Even if 140 by 90 on earlier grounds, it is considered to be a proper hypertension patient, but now the normal is 140 and 90. This leads to heart diseases and affects the vital organs like the brain and kidney. The pressure of the circulating blood on the walls of the blood vessels can even make it even worse, that they can die one day without even any proper diagnostics of the cardiac arrest. There are 5 foods which you should avoid during blood pressure. The first one is salt, second one is fried items, third one is meat, fourth one is alcohol, and fifth one is fresh juices. The second one is the coronary heart disease, the CAD or atherosclerosis. Here what happens is calcium, fat, cholesterol and the fibrous tissues are deposited in the coronary artery, if you can find. So this makes the lumen of the arteries narrower, and thereby the blood supply is completely affected. Third one is angina. This is also called as the angina pectoris. It is an acute chest pain due to oxygen deficiency in heart muscles. So what basically happens is there is an acute shortage of oxygen. At a small time there is some shortage. And after some time, if you find that muscles will be normal again. And this is due to improper blood flow. And not to get shocked, it is very common in middle-aged and elderly people. Heart failure. It is the inability of the heart to pump blood to meet the needs of the body. Congestion of heart lungs is the main symptom. First, the lungs will go congested. Cardiac arrest. Cardiac arrest is a very dangerous one where the heart stops beating. So what happens is the heart attack, what we call now is cardiac arrest. So the artery is completely blocked. You can see from the picture. As a result of it, there will be no blood flow. So there's a sudden damage of the heart muscle due to inadequate blood supply as the artery is getting blocked. and the artifacts can be completely fixed by a lines of treatment.